who are minister of the Methodist churches in Dunedin and Mosgiel. So I'm going to welcome you to this, what do you call it, Gisborne Talk. A Gibson Talk and among the Gibson Talks. I think somebody else is going to introduce Liesel, her dad. I was saying I've had more cups of coffee with her dad than I have been in this church, I think. I've been to 3 different churches. I don't know which church I belong to. So there's one here and one in Glenvale and one in Mosgiel. So. But welcome to this one, which has the biggest congregation and a nice big congregation of visitors tonight. So, Rod.
The number of coffees, Ian, is probably to keep you awake. And
struggle to sleep.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's very exciting for me as to introduce our daughter, Liesel, to this first Colin Gibson lecture series for 2026. And so what can a father say in a few words on an occasion like this? Well, I'm very aware that if experience of a subject is the best knowledge to share with anyone, then Liesel has had experience in abundance, particularly with her medical condition, narcolepsy. That means she can uncontrollably at times fall asleep. Hopefully not tonight. How she ever finished university learning was simply amazing to us as a family. Sleep, like breathing, is something that everyone thinks they know about, and we tend to do automatically. But like breathing itself, there are skills and processes and knowledge that allow us to do breathing much better, giving us many more health options. So let me hand over to Liesel to lead us into the wonderful world of sleep. Please welcome Liesel.
Well, it's not often that your father introduces you, so thank you, Roddy. And thank you for being here tonight. It's a real pleasure to be invited along. And it's also a real pleasure to be the first speaker of the Gibson series for this year. So this feels like perfect timing. The wonderful world of sleep. And unbeknownst to maybe some of you, it is World Sleep Day coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And that takes place every year. This year it's Friday the 13th, a nice auspicious date. And this happens just before the equinox every year, so I believe that's on the 20th. So this, if you're not familiar with World Sleep Day, has been in existence since 2008, and it is to raise awareness around sleep health. And every year it has a different theme. So this year's theme is Sleep Well, Live Better. And I feel that this talk will hopefully be aligned with that theme. So I'd like to talk about 3 things tonight. The first is, as Roddy has alluded to, my experience with sleep. And the next is information that we know about sleep, or some of the science that's around sleep. But please bear with me here. We will be going we'll be doing a very shallow ride through this. So just to give you a taste of things. And then the third topic will be, or the third part will be how sleep more generally kind of impacts our society, and really the culture of sleep is what I want to sort of touch on. So, let's see if I can make this fabulous device work. It feels like it's turned on. Right, wonderful. So the first part of this talk is I want to start with my own experience of sleep, and here I'm alluding to it, how sleep found me and I found sleep, a beautiful relationship. Because really, as Rod said, sleep is the thing that has brought me here tonight, and it is from my own personal experience that I have had a journey into this wonderful world of sleep. So to start with, I'd like to take you back to 1988. In 1988, I was 14. I was on school music camp, a delightful experience, and it was choir practice. So if you can imagine that it's set up for a choir where we can all see the conductor, so there are different levels of sort of seating, and my friend and I were standing on the back benches at the back of the choir. Nothing too unusual here. And I was standing with my friend Berry. Now, maybe this was a mistake in the first place, because Berry always made me laugh. And it didn't really need to be anything funny, just anything Berry said usually set me off. So we're in choir practice, and Berry must have said something, probably not even that funny, and I started laughing. Not that unusual either. But what was strange is I fell off the bench and landed on the floor. And that was quite weird. I had never had this experience before. Suddenly, 1 minute laughing, next minute in a heap on the floor. So when I got back from music camp, I said to my mum, this strange thing happened. I started laughing and I fell off the bench and landed on the floor. And she was like, oh, Liesel, you're a bit of a drama queen, aren't you? Always wanting a bit of attention. And I was like, no, it was weird. And she said, yes, I'm sure it was. And sort of got left there. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about laughing and falling over. What's that got to do with sleep? But actually, part of the awareness I want to raise here is that sleep is a funny, invisible thing that presents in lots of different ways. And little did I know, laughing was the beginning of my journey into realising I had a sleep condition. So sleep conditions don't always get diagnosed because they are unusual, and there are often symptoms that you don't recognise. And laughing is one of those things you wouldn't necessarily put together with sleep. And sleep is also something that we often think is just about when we get into bed at night. We pull up the covers, we get comfy, we turn off the lights, it's nice and dark, we go to sleep. But sleep is actually about every single thing we do every day prior to getting into bed at night. So let me move on to my next. Hey, here we go. So let me take you back a few more years. And I've got a little timeline of Liesel faces here to guide you on this journey. And I've called it Night Owl to Early Bird, and I've tried to choose actually titles to the slides that are little sleep euphemisms or idioms or words, phrases that we use to go with sleep. So they've been chosen for that reason. But probably when I was younger, I would have said I was a bit of a night owl. And these are categories that scientists even use to say, yes, people do tend to slip into these two categories. You're either an early morning person or you are a bit more of a night owl. And you might fit somewhere in between, but often one of those categories feels more you. So the first photo there is me as sort of, I don't know, almost 2 years old maybe. I did not like sleeping. Did not like sleeping at all, much to my mother's dismay. I did not do naps. I did not do day sleeps. I liked to be awake. And I liked to be participating. I felt like if I went to sleep, I was missing out on life. And that was really the way I felt about sleep until I was about 14 or 15. No, that's probably a lie. It's probably the way I felt about sleep until very recently, actually. But it was the way I operated when I was younger. And I remember that sleep seemed to be the answer to everything. Whenever anything went wrong, I know my parents tended to say to me, I don't know if you remember this or not, Rod, but if I said, things went really terribly today at school, I had this fight with someone or something like that, it would be, well, you're probably just a bit tired and you need to go to bed early tonight. I'm like, I'm so grumpy today. Oh, you're probably a bit overtired. You probably should get an early night. Why am I fighting with my sister again? Well, you know, you might want an early night. That might fix things. Everything seemed to be related to sleep, and I should be having more of it. And this always used to drive me nuts because I didn't want to be asleep. I wanted to be awake. So back to that situation I was talking about before. When I was 14, I was at music camp, fell on the floor. Who knew what was going on? Well, it wasn't long after that that I actually was in the New World car park down in town with my friend Marinda and my mum, and we were walking across the car park, and Marinda and I were just talking away as you do when you're 14 and you're having a great old time, and I started laughing, fell to the ground in the middle of the car park, on the concrete, and my mum was right there. So she saw this happen and she realised this wasn't normal, and this wasn't me just being a drama queen, and something was up. So after that, she took it quite seriously, and I saw the GP. I got a referral to the hospital to see the cardiologist because they thought it might have been my heart that was making me fall over. So I went through a series of tests and ECGs, etc., and everything seemed to be good with my heart, which was great. But the cardiologist said, hey, I wonder if it's this thing called cataplexy. That's a neurological condition. I might send you to neurology. So I went to neurology, and I got lots of little ECG things, little nodules put on my head, and my brain waves were looked at. And then I did a latency test, a sleep latency test, which is when you get tested to see how quickly you fall asleep. And sure enough, after these tests, they came back with a diagnosis of narcolepsy, a sleep condition, narcolepsy with cataplexy, neither of which I had ever heard of before. So I'm not sure whether you know what either of these are, but I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about it, because this was the beginning of my own sort of sleep journey, really, into life with narcolepsy, a sleep condition that I will have for the rest of my life. So narcolepsy is classified as a rare condition. It sort of just slips in under the rare conditions kind of qualifications, but they say that it's very difficult to diagnose. So a lot of people will go undiagnosed for many, many years, if diagnosed at all, and that may mean that it's actually a lot more common than we understand it to be. So you may have heard of narcolepsy from movies or a cartoon, or it's often the butt of jokes in things like a movie. You know, someone's got narcolepsy. Oh, they just fell asleep in the middle of the room, or we were walking along and then they fell asleep, or they were eating their food and their face went into their soup. It's usually used as a comedic sort of moment in a movie. But it's actually a serious neurological condition. So that's what I'd like to bring some awareness to, and it affects your sleep-wake cycle. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. But before I move on from this lovely collection of my faces, it's kind of interesting in some weird way how you morph and evolve. But the fourth picture in is me 19, age 19. And that's when I started to actually develop this sort of symptoms of narcolepsy. So cataplexy was the first thing, which is the laughing and the falling over. And they said you'll develop more of these narcolepsy-like symptoms as you get older. So when I was 19, as that photo is there, was when I started to notice I was falling asleep. As I move through these photos, I see sort of at the end of the first line and the beginning of the second line, just how sleepy I look. And I chose those photos specifically because that time in my life, in my 20s and early 30s, I just did not manage my narcolepsy at all. It was very unmanaged. I was falling asleep all the time. I've got a lot of photos where my eyes just look like I'm half asleep. And I never realised that's what I looked like. But I do still sometimes look like that, but it was much more sort of prevalent in those years. So it's sort of been captured a little bit in those photos. But yeah, I just wanted to show a little bit of a progression through life there. In the eyes, so you could see some of that. So what does narcolepsy look like? Well, this is what it looks like sometimes. Living with narcolepsy. One of the probably most obvious symptoms of having narcolepsy is excessive daytime sleepiness. And I don't know about you, but you've probably been tired during the day and maybe had a really late night the night before, or things are a bit stressful, or you needed just sort of a little bit of a catch-up, so you might feel like a nap after a big lunch or something like that. That's all pretty normal. This is not normal. This is what we would call like living with extreme sleep deprivation. That's the sort of equatable sort of way of thinking about excessive daytime sleepiness. It's like you're sleep deprived for 48 to 72 hours, sort of constantly. And so if you've ever been really badly jet lagged, that's sort of like that feeling. Or maybe you've had a couple of nights where you haven't had much sleep at all. You've been sick or up with kids or whatever it might be. You know that once you've had that sort of level of sleep deprivation, you're not functioning very well. And that's what narcolepsy is like all the time, which is also sort of something that's quite invisible, because a lot of my friends know I have narcolepsy, but a lot of people won't have seen me like this, whereas people that live with me usually know this is more of what I'm like. But these are some pretty typical sort of moments where you can just fall asleep anytime, any place. The first picture there is when I was living in South Korea, and I'm in my 30s. We're out for lunch, so that's the middle of the day, and I'm sitting there with my friend Garrett. Obviously a perfect photo opportunity, because there I am, fast asleep. The next photo is a very, very common occurrence, which is me sitting on the couch, falling asleep. Now, the couch doesn't even have to be that comfortable. If I sit on a couch, give me 2 minutes, I'm asleep. Whether I'm reading or on my laptop, or we've lost connection. No, we're coming back. Excellent. Whatever it might be on the couch, I tend to fall asleep. So that's a fairly typical sort of face there. Liesel half asleep or asleep. The next one's me in a car. I get in a car and, we're losing my connection, aren't we? Hopefully it just continues to come back. That's good. Sitting in a car at traffic lights with my friend, and he looked over and I was fast asleep. So I don't drive for this very excellent reason, that I fall asleep if I'm in a car usually. And the last photo there is very recent, in the last couple of months. There I am at the kitchen table. I'm eating. My hand is in a bowl of chips, and I am asleep. That is also quite typical. I can be eating or have food in my mouth and fall asleep. So this is just a little smorgasbord of what some of that looks like. There are other symptoms, though, that come with narcolepsy. One of them is cataplexy, which I was telling you about. Laughing or strong emotions make me fall over. And that's got something to do with the sleep-wake cycle being disrupted, and it's a chemical release of sort of things that make you relax when you're asleep, but it's happening at a really inappropriate time, like a strong emotion. So that's something that is quite difficult to deal with if it's not sort of well controlled. The other things that are typical of narcolepsy are hallucinations, so whether they're sleep, sort of, well, they're often when you're half awake, half asleep, and they're either auditory or visual hallucinations, and the other one is sleep paralysis, which occurs when you feel like you're awake but you can't move. So, and they're things that people without narcolepsy can experience as well. Often, if you're sleep deprived or if you are under extreme stress, you might experience those things, but they're not usual sleep sort of things that most people will experience. So, as I've learned to live with this really quite interesting, sensitive sleep condition, where I feel like I've got a low battery most of the time. I sort of have to recharge my battery. I've come to understand that actually fighting sleep the way I wanted to when I was younger is just not helpful, and really I have to learn a different method of dealing with sleep, and so I've decided to get interested in it. So, this brings me to the second part of my talk, which is really around what do we know about sleep? Because when you start looking at sleep, it's fascinating. And this is what I'm starting to get quite interested in. So, because sleep is somewhat invisible, we do it in private usually, at night time, in our houses. We're not looking at each other going to sleep. we often don't really talk about sleep either. And that means we've got assumptions around what sleep looks like, because we don't really talk an awful lot about it. Yet there's some fundamentals to it that I think are quite important. So if we're talking about the fundamentals of life, you sort of look at things like air, food, water, shelter. They're often sort of the first things we might think about. And there's the rule of threes, which you might have heard of before, which is 3 minutes survival without air, 3 hours survival without shelter in an extreme environment, 3 days survival without water, and 3 weeks survival without food. Now that's a rough guide. Some people can do it different levels, but this is the rule of threes. However, sleep is not really included in that, and it's often not the first thing people think of either, if you're thinking survival. Now, for ethical reasons, obviously we can't really test how long we can go without sleep, and surviving that experience. In fact, there was someone who set the record for how long you could go without sleep in 1986, I believe, 18 days. A little bit longer than 18 days, but it was 18 days without sleep. But they actually then ruled that that was no longer going to be a Guinness Book of Records record that they updated. They no longer looked at that because they said it was just too dangerous, actually, because you can die from a lack of sleep. And so there's no point doing that record. But we know this does give me information that says, you know what, my parents were actually right. Sleep, it is essential. So they were onto something when they were telling me that sleep was the most important thing when I was younger. It is, it's an essential thing. So what does this look like? Sleep, for me, when I was younger, I thought it was such a waste of time. What are you doing when you're asleep? Well, nothing. You're just missing out on everything else. Apparently that's not entirely true. In fact, apparently it's a very busy time for your brain. Your brain is doing a lot of hard work while you are sort of out of the way, so to speak. And it's sort of noted to be brain housework. Your brain is doing the cleaning. So you are cleansing your brain of toxins that might have built up during the day, and you're giving your cells and your neurons good healthy sort of like rejuvenative qualities and powers while you are sleeping. And this means that when we wake up, we have the ability to function cognitively. We have good cognitive functioning. We can remember things. We can learn things. We can focus. We can think. And all of these things happen because our brain has had time to clean, do the housework, and get us ready for the next day. It also has really amazing long-term health benefits, which are harder to sort of measure in the short term, but as we look at it over time, it can protect us from things like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, depression, and obesity. So sleep is a magic superpower, really. If we want to get into it, it's one of the most fundamental things we can do for our mental and our physical health. So, how exactly does sleep work? Well, this is where it gets quite interesting. And even scientists, there's a lot going on with sleep research. It's becoming quite popular. But it's also still something that's really we don't know an awful lot about it. We know lots of mammals do it. All the mammals do it. We're probably the worst at it. And I think it's something that we're still learning a lot about. So you may be way more familiar with this kind of graphic than I am, but like I said, I'm scratching the surface and just giving a little overview today. So how do we sleep? Well, there's 2 sleep mechanisms. Good to know. Everyone's wide awake. That's good. So there's 2 mechanisms at play with sleep, and one of them is your body's biological clock, which controls your circadian rhythms. And the other is your sleep-wake homeostasis, which is all about how the balance of the systems in your body operate. And these 2 things are at play. Now, this map here shows you 2 lines, and I hope they're coming up as yellow and white. Do they look yellow and white? From here, they both look white. Good. The yellow line being melatonin, which is the hormone that's released from your brain. When it gets dark, you get sleepy. So this is an amazing part of the sleep process. The other is your body temperature, which, as you can see from the slide there, the two intersect, and as your sleep hormone gets released, your body temperature goes down, and as you come out of sleep, your body temperature goes up. So this is something that sort of constantly sort of does this as you are moving through sleep and wake. So these two intersect, and they kind of go opposite to each other, really. And this tells us that actually one thing I think is quite interesting is that a lot of us will wake up in the middle of the night, and our sleep temperature, actually, our body temperature does usually take another sort of like a lift in temperature about 1 to 3 a.m. in the morning. So a lot of us will wake up during that time, and that's quite normal because your body temperature does usually rise around that sort of time, but it will rise and fall throughout the night. And sometimes we're aware of waking up with that, and sometimes we're not. But all very normal stuff. But what this tells me is that there are two things that get really affected or affect our sleep, which is light and temperature. So if our sleeping environment is light, it's going to affect our ability to release that hormone that sends us to sleep. And if our room is really, really hot or even really, really cold, cold is easier to deal with than hot, but if the temperature of the room is not great, that will also affect our sleep. So that's not just about kind of feeling comfortable, it's actually about some of the biological things that happen when we go to sleep. So the other two things are just our sleep, the types of, I'm straying from the microphone, the two types of sleep that we have, which is REM sleep, the dream sleep, and then the non-REM sleep. And these two interact throughout the night. We go through 3 stages of non-REM sleep, which go from light sleep down to deep sleep and to deepest sleep. And deepest sleep is the most restorative sleep. And as we get older, this sleep changes, and we get less of that actually over time. So that's and we'll usually cycle through those about 4 or 5 times a night. So there's this lovely cycle going on. It's quite fascinating, really. Like, all this is happening while I thought nothing was going on. So I'm learning. So with that sort of background, and like I say, a very quick little background, I want to move into the third sort of part of this talk, which is really about a work-life balance. Like, this is a nice sort of terminology that we use, work-life balance. What does that really mean? Does that mean we don't live when we're at work? I'm not sure. But I want to talk a little bit about society and culture around sleep, because how do we collectively think about sleep? How do we shape our lives with sleep supposedly as a priority? Is it a priority? So there's no sort of perfect or ideal sleep out there, regardless of what we might want to think. There is none. There is no perfect sleep. Throughout our lives, we go through different stages where we need different levels of sleep. So from babies that need a lot of sleep through to teenagers that need different sleep timing. And then as we grow older, we actually get less and less sleep, but that can differ by the individual as well. So there's no real sort of set way of doing sleep, but there are some guidelines. And people tend to agree that 7 to 9 hours is a lovely optimum time for adults to sleep. That said, that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. But are our lives set up for this sort of best sleep that we can get for ourselves? And I would argue, no, not really, especially based on what I just said before about light and temperature. So we kind of have adopted this 24-hour society. And I know when I lived in Korea, I was absolutely amazed by the fact that I could go out at any time of the day or night and buy earrings. Yep. I bought earrings at 3 o'clock in the morning once because one of them had fallen out, and I was out at a dance party and an earring had fallen out. I thought, well, that can't be good. I need new earrings. Well, this shop over here seems to be selling them. Everything was open 24/7. It was a city that never slept in Seoul in particular. So that's an extreme example where the big cities sort of stay awake day and night. But we actually keep ourselves awake with our lighting. So for the last 100 or so years, we have electric lights, an amazing, wonderful thing. But it also means that if we live in cities, or in built-up areas, we never see true darkness. We've always got street lights. We all have our lights on until often we go to bed. We don't actually understand what it's like to be in darkness or for our bodies to experience that. And this means that not only do we have lighting, etc., but we've created wonderful devices like TVs and laptops and tablets and phones that light up our world until all hours of the day and night. So even if we're turning off our lights, we often have our own little mini lights that we like to play with. And this means that our body is not getting primed for sleep. There's also I've found all these wonderful terminologies. Social jet lag. Anyone heard of that before? Social jet lag. I was like, I love that. Okay. Social jet lag is supposedly about the idea that we're not living to sort of a consistent routine with our sleep. And that means we might have late nights during the week or feel a bit tired, so we'll have a sleep in the weekend or catch up on sleep later. We're not really working to a routine that optimizes our sleep. And so we have this sort of jet lag almost. We have sleep inconsistency because of our social lives. The other part is our productivity sort of culture, where we want to be, well, sometimes actually we need to be working, particularly in this day and age. I think a lot of people feel the pressures of cost of living and financial cost. They feel they need to take on another job. They also have family commitments, relationships. The cost of time and sleep become this thing where, well, I can do sleep later, but I really need to be working right now. So the idea that sleep should come first, I think, is quite an alien one to a lot of people, to our culture and the way that our society sort of operates. Which means that sleep really becomes a nice to have rather than an essential, which when we start unpacking it, sounds kind of crazy, actually. What are we doing? Are we trying to hold our breath underwater for as long as we can? Yes, I think we are. Are we trying to go without food for longer than 3 weeks? Yes, we are. Are we going without water for 3 days and longer? Yep, we're pushing the boundaries. So I think this means that we're actually living with sleep deprivation, which becomes a common occurrence. Actually, anyone at any time in your life can have sleep deprivation, and it can occur for a number of different reasons. And usually it's just a short-term thing. It might be because of stress or something going on in your life right now. But I think more and more it's becoming just common that we're actually sleep deprived. And this can mean that we treat sleep deprivation as normal, which is even more sort of scary, really. As someone who lives in that zone, I know this is not normal and it shouldn't be. So what is sleep deprivation? Well, 24 hours into sleep deprivation, you will be operating similar to somebody who is intoxicated with alcohol to the point that they should not be driving. That's just 24 hours in. If you go longer, then you're starting to have micro sleeps, which is when you fall asleep and you don't even know you're asleep. It's just for a couple of seconds in the middle of a conversation or driving the car or cooking the meal. You don't know that you've fallen asleep for a couple of seconds. It can also mean you get hallucinations because you're starting to sort of lose the edges of reality. And actually, as you move into 72 hours of sleep deprivation, you are now losing the edges of reality and you can't tell what is real and what is not. So is this safe? Is this healthy? And as I just sort of alluded to, yes, as someone that lives with this, it is not safe and it is not healthy. I do not have a driver's license for a very good reason. It got taken off me, which was actually also a very good thing. If you are sleep deprived, you should not be driving, and that's how I operate every day. So I cannot tell when I'm about to have one of those micro sleeps or a micro sleep that becomes 15 minutes of sleep. I don't know that. So driving a car is like a no-no. Operating machinery, no-no. Swimming, no, not a great idea. Having a bath by myself with no one else around, no, also not a great idea. Liesel relaxes in the bath. I don't know what's going to happen next. If I have a sleep in the bath, that might not be the best thing for me in terms of living a little longer. But There are lots of reasons why sleep deprivation is not okay, and if people are living with this day in, day out, it's actually kind of scary. So, just a few stats and research sort of nuggets here for you, just to chew over. I was reading a journal article from Sleep Health in 2020, and it was saying that there's a high proportion of short sleepers in New Zealand. And this was of concern as short sleep showed consistent association with negative psychological well-being. So we're not just talking about our physical health, but actually the longer we go without sleep, the more this negatively affects our well-being and the way we feel about life. There was also a global sleep survey done in 2024 that was talking about 90% of us agree that our personal lives would benefit from good sleep. Well, that's good, excellent. But about 60% of us do not feel rested when we wake up in the morning. The majority of us use screens before bed. And this is New Zealand that they're talking about too. And 93% of us drink coffee or some kind of caffeinated beverage. Hello, yes, I would be one of those 93%. And half of us within that group have our last drink within 5 hours of going to sleep. So actually not the recommended time frame. So we're drinking our caffeinated beverages nice and close to bedtime. So we also have a real, there's a flow-on effect here. So everything is interrelated. How we work affects our sleep. How we sleep affects our work. This continues. How we live affects our sleep. How we sleep affects our life. So yes, we sort of operate in this cycle that continually impacts each other. So there's also a financial cost to sleep if we're looking at work, which is apparently the cost of sleep deprivation or inefficient sleep has an impact of more than $411 billion each year in the US alone. So people not getting adequate sleep has a huge financial, you can actually measure it in financial terms. And one study also estimated the cost of workplace error and accidents in the workplace that were linked to insomnia or sleep deprivation was about $31 billion a year. So that's being put into financial terms, which is an interesting way of looking at it. But it is a realistic thing that we are living without adequate sleep. So poor sleep, of course, undermines everything, really. It impairs our memories, our learning, emotional regulation, our focus, our decision-making. How many people are making decisions for us every day that might be under the influence of, sleep? Might be under the influence of sleep, I like that, or lack of sleep. Pilots that are flying planes that are flying between different time zones, they are jet-lagged always. They are operating on a shift cycle, which is never good for your sleep. And they are landing and flying planes. So I don't want to alert any of you or scare any of you, but it is just one of those things we don't think about. We are living with people making decisions every day that may be incredibly sleep deprived. So people without sleep just get higher burnout rates in jobs, they get reduced life and health satisfaction, decreased engagement. In other words, we're just not functioning well as human beings if we're not getting sleep, which feels like that's a bit unfair. We should be operating at our optimum to be the best human beings we can be. And this is something I think we can have a little bit of control over. So I want to do a little tongue-in-cheek moment with you here. This was an article that was in, was it The Onion, I think, at the beginning in January. And I'll just read you the article. So I'd have to take my glasses off to read properly. Prompting exclamations of astonishment from colleagues and supervisors, local man Joshua Lingard reportedly appeared entirely unrecognisable Wednesday after enjoying a full 8 hours of sleep. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realise it was Josh without those dark bags under his eyes and his usual lifeless monotone, said Lingard's co-worker Alison Connors, who gasped in surprise as she witnessed the utterly transformed 43-year-old enter their office after an unbroken night of rest, smile with genuine enthusiasm, and greet her with an uncharacteristic sense of mental clarity. It's not just that his skin isn't all puffy and pale either. There's something about his personality. I think it's that he isn't constantly staring into the distance in a mixture of confusion and pain. Plus, he's actually getting work done. At first I thought Josh had a more handsome brother whose brain functioned normally, but it's actually him. Incredible. Co-workers later expressed relief when Lingard drank caffeine after 2 p.m, ensuring he would return to his typical dysfunctional self the next day. So yeah, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think it captures something of what we're talking about here, unfortunately. So just to move to this area of cultural attitudes, which really is about, we can change this. This doesn't have to be the way that we operate, and we may not even know this is how we're operating. So that's part of what I'm trying to draw some, I guess, focus to. The good news is, yep, we can do tiny changes, we can do tiny behavioural things that will actually optimise our sleep and the quality of our sleep. So whether it's just looking at our environments, what does that look like? Or thinking about our bedtime, is it consistent? Do we have light in our rooms? Do we have conversations or talks like this about sleep, just to maybe raise some awareness and to think about it together, like a little bit of support around, well, I could make some changes because change is hard. These are some of the things that we could do to maybe start moving cultural attitudes, and also about redefining what we think status or success looks like, rather than it being sort of burning the candle at both ends, or, you know, oh, I did an all-nighter to get that thing done. Maybe it's about, oh, I had such a great night's sleep, and that's why I feel so good today, and that's a reward. People feel that that's a status symbol or a symbol of success. So just to finish off here, I think there's a report that just came out this month from McKinsey Health Institute, which is talking about the impact of health on our economics, and how these two things are very closely byproduct or bidirectional, really. You have good health, economic development is going to follow. You have good economic sort of development, you're going to have money for health improvement. And they're basically saying that preventative measures will make a huge difference to the fact that we are living longer, but we are living longer with more chronic disease. So as we continue to sort of live longer, we're living longer with worse sort of like health outcomes. But a lot of this can be reversed by preventative measures, and sleep is one of those things that we can actually access and start working on, that actually can protect us from some of the diseases that they rate as the highest prevalent disease in the next sort of like 30 or 40 years, things like cardiovascular health, diabetes, depression or mental illness, and also cancers. So these are some of the top things that they were saying we could prevent, which is really quite encouraging as well, that we don't need to do much to change what could be a huge health win. So how do we collectively create a society that starts making that healthy choice the easiest choice, which I think is a nice question to ask. And what might this society look like if we're moving into the future? So before I sort of finish, because I can see I'm well on time, maybe well over time, but I would love it if you would just indulge me quickly with a little show of hands. If I ask a couple of questions about your sleep, and you don't have to answer, but if you don't mind just popping your hand up, that would be great, just to have a little feel of what's going on in this room. So how many people, just a little show of hands, watch TV or have a screen or your laptop or your mobile or whatever within an hour or two of going to bed? How many people would be? Oh yeah, me too. Okay. How many people wake up in the middle of the night? Okay, we're good. How many people would say they have a comfy bed? I do, yeah. Yep, cool. How many people look forward to going to bed? Yeah? I'm up and down on that one. Yeah. How How many people sleep in a really dark room? And by that I mean no light is getting into your room. Like you've got good blackout blinds or curtains. Yep. Cool. And how many people use your bedroom for work during the day or hobbies or anything else that isn't really sleep? Is the odd person? Yep. Okay, cool. And how many people nap during the day? I'm a napper. Yep. How many of us have a caffeinated beverage within a few hours of going to sleep? Yep. Yep. Something like, yep. And how many would say you have a consistent waking up or sleeping time or both? So you go to bed at the same time, you wake up at the same time, even in the weekend. Would that hold for the weekend as well? Yep. Pretty consistent. Cool. Look at you. What a team. And how many people have their lights on until they pretty much go to bed? Bright lights. So it's sort of this level of lighting before you go to bed. Yep. How many people might dim the lights or have quite dim lighting just before you go to bed? Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for indulging me. Now I'd just like to say formally, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thanks for letting me talk about something that's not only really personal, but it is something that I'm getting increasingly passionate about. I think sleep is underknown, yeah. And I'm really excited to be able to share a little bit more about that. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And if you've got any questions, I'd love to answer anything you might have. So, oh, yes, a question. Hello.
I'm wondering how long you stay asleep for when you fall off.
Ah, yes, good question. That can...
Consistent?
No.
I'm wondering how long you stay asleep for.
Yes, it can vary. So it can be anything from trying to stay awake and continue a conversation with you where I'm like, oh, yeah. So I'm doing the micro sleep thing. Or it will be sort of 5 minutes maybe on the table, at the dinner table. Or it will be 15 or 20 minutes if I actually have a nap. So if I go for a nap, 15 minutes probably. Yeah, but not longer than that. So probably 15 minutes tops. Yeah. Yes. Another question.
Do you take Epigreen or no-dose or anything like that?
Do I take anything to keep myself awake?
Yeah.
I do use coffee. I have coffee first thing in the morning, well, about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then another one about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that does help me stay awake. I also take medication for narcolepsy, which helps me keep...
Do you do exercises?
Yes, I do.
Such as, give us the best one.
Best exercise is waking up every morning at about 6:15 and going for a walk. So I get the sunlight in my eyes, and that's apparently optimum way to wake yourself up. So, yeah. Yes?
But we are recording the thing, so if you're asking a question, please at least speak into the microphone, because other people who aren't watching now will be able to hear what you're saying.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Any other questions? Because I'm very happy to talk about any of this if you're curious. I know narcolepsy is a bit of a weird thing too, so very happy to answer questions.
I'd just like to say that I have a regular 9 hours a night sleep.
Optimum.
I use an eye mask,
Right.
so there's no light in the room at all. And I do laughter yoga, and so some of the breathing exercises that we've learned from that, I do those and fall asleep quite quickly.
Brilliant.
So I'm very pleased with so I was interested to come along to
Yes.
hear what you had to say about sleep.
And discover that you're already doing it perfectly well. That's excellent. Oh,
I recently purchased a Derilla pillow.
oh yes.
Have you heard of those?
I've heard of it.
From
What
the
have you...
States. It's this blue shape, and your head fits really comfortably into that.
Brilliant. Yeah. It's about finding the right thing for you too, that's comfortable.
Yes, I've got a question. Well, about I have glasses on for blue light for the last hour of watching television, and I take a magnesium deep sleep and a melatonin one. Sometimes I take a melatonin 2 at 2 in the morning.
Right.
I go to bed about 11, but I just have trouble getting more than 7, reaching 7. I've just got a smartwatch thing that tells me, and I'm up a lot in the night too. So I just and not having your phone in the bedroom. I have that out in the hall, and we have a bedside light that's got a red light. So I don't know how the bedroom. Yeah, not really clear. I don't know what else to do to try and get a decent sleep. To be honest, yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're doing lots of really, really good things, which is great.
Yeah. My REM's a bit low, and I know that's where in your REM time that's when you get, or your memory gets laid down during that time, and so that can be under or just over an hour in a night. So I've only had it for 3 weeks, but I think I've had 2 nights over 7 hours.
Well, I definitely think with the tracking, because I track my sleep as well, but I think tracking can be 2 things for you. It depends how you use it. It can be just a good guide to give you a little bit of an indication of where you're at. It can also be something that can make you more anxious because you're not winning at your sleep. And it shouldn't be about that. And as someone who I know I cannot stay awake longer than about 3 seconds after I get into bed, my watch says I go to sleep about half an hour after I go to bed, and that's just not true. So it's not always reading exactly what's happening for you, so I wouldn't necessarily trust that you're not getting that 7 hours. I think it may be right sometimes, but it's not 100% accurate by any means. So use it as a loose guide if it's helpful, I think. Yeah.
I did hear someone who's had it for stepping way back when they first come out, and they travelled by car from Dunedin to Christchurch, and they'd done 400 steps.
Amazing. All that pedalling, the braking and the accelerating. There's your steps.
Or just steering.
Yeah, just steering. There we go. Yep.
Liesel, I wonder what you would recommend for young men in particular. I can describe one that I know quite well, who goes to bed at about 12 or 1 o'clock at night. He doesn't sleep. He goes on his computer at that stage to link in with his friends right around the world. He wakes up about 11 o'clock in the morning, often doesn't have breakfast, and no matter what his parents do, he seems not to be able to break out of this cycle.
Does he want to break out of the cycle?
It's hard to know. He's ADHD, and he's only been diagnosed in the last 2 or 3 years. But he's not on his own. There's a whole host of younger people out there, and I suspect it's often younger men who do this kind of thing. He used to play Pokemon Go and rip around the parks at around about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why he wasn't arrested, but and he seemed to live with that. But it has totally wrecked both his abilities for academic success and his chances of getting a job.
I mean, his sleep cycle is off completely.
Yes.
But I think it's like everything, unless someone wants to change that, it's quite difficult to offer anything other than just hopefully you'll find a point where it becomes too much and you have to change. But yeah, there's lots of things that he could do differently, yes, but if he doesn't want to, that's quite hard to put that in place.
To all intents, he's a very nice young man.
I'm sure he is, yeah. just a little bit sleep deprived.
That's when he's awake on rare occasions during the day.
That's right, yeah.
So deep sleep reduces as we get older, and also melatonin secretion, endogenous melatonin secretion reduces significantly. Especially after 60 years old. I've seen the graphs with age and melatonin secretion. So what is
the value of taking melatonin tablets regularly, given that there's no studies on the long-term effects of melatonin taken for years.
I am not a medical doctor, so I am definitely not giving any advice at all, but I would say from my own personal reading, there's a lot of conflicting advice around melatonin, and what I've read more recently says it's not that helpful, and yes, we don't know what the long-term effects are, so that would be the concerning part. That said, that's just my own personal view based on what I have read, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think possibly we've got time for a couple more questions, and that's it.
Any other burning sleep thoughts?
Well, I was just going to relate an experience. I went to live in London. I had family there, and the first time I came back, I had classic jet lag. I was useless for a week, and I really resented it because I was only home about 6 or 7 weeks. And my friend who owns a health shop out in Mosgiel said, "Oh, you need no jet lag." And I now, every time I long-term travel, well, which is anything over 3 or 4 hours, I take no jet lag. Now, for me, it works like a treat because I don't drink coffee and I'm careful about my toothpaste. They do say don't use strong peppermint toothpaste. And I take it religiously, and I'm fine. And my family also, when they were going as a family to Australia, they were going to a youth conference. They went round the road in Covent Garden to a little homeopathic shop, and they made up a remedy for the whole family. But the younger son thought it was all a stupid thing and didn't take it. But the rest of the family went sightseeing for 2 days, much to everybody else's chagrin, because they were lying around in a heap, feeling miserable. But I really think more research needs to be done, especially for pilots, because you're right to mention them. There have been some really big disasters with pilots who just have been sleep deprived and forget their routines. Anyhow, thank you very much for a most interesting talk.
Great, thank you.
Well, on that note, I think it's a good time to wrap up and thank Liesel for a very intelligently approached talk on the issue of sleep. I think we must have learned a great deal more about it tonight than even some of us older people who are having trouble sleeping and waking up at 3 a.m. A lot of you, I think, will do that for one reason or other. Or maybe wake up at 5 and find it difficult to go back to sleep. Anyway, we've learned a lot. I hope that your sleep investigations are deepened, and on that behalf I would like to present you with a small gift from the Gibson Talks Committee. Thank you.
Just an announcement about another event which is here next Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. It's a friendship night, and it's with members of the Muslim community, so it's an interfaith Ramadan Lenten gathering, and we will have a speaker, Professor Douglas Pratt, who is actually a former minister of the Mornington Methodist Church in the early 80s, he tells me. But he's now an Anglican priest living in Cromwell, and he's an authority internationally on Christian-Muslim relations. So 7 o'clock next Wednesday, same time, same place. And we're also going to have a concert on the piano with some Turkish music and some classical piano, and a really interesting talk from Doug Pratt on values, cultural and religious values for peace in Christianity and Islam. So it should be really interesting. Everyone's welcome, and if you are coming, please bring a small contribution for supper, which will be at 8:30, which is when the Muslim friends won't have eaten all day. They will break their fast at 8:30. But we're allowed to eat before we come, unless any of you are Muslim. Thank you.
Gibson Talk. Can't you hear me? Hopefully the third Wednesday of the month. So here we are in February, March, April. Wednesday, third week, hopefully. There's a bit of a jiggling going on because sometimes you just can't get the speakers when you want them.
Oh, right.